Hello, my name is Sydney. At a family party meant to honor our legacy, my sister clapped after our father slapped me in front of 60 people. She stood there smiling while he shouted, "Give us the house! You've got no kids!" And my mother? She laughed, then called me a barren waste. They said it so casually, like they'd been rehearsing it their whole lives. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing this wasn't their first attempt to erase me. It was just the first time they did it out loud. So, I made one quiet call, just one, and everything they'd built, it started to crumble. But here's the thing, what kind of family plans your humiliation, like a surprise toast? And what would you do if they asked for everything you built because you didn't have children to deserve it? The email came through on a Tuesday morning. I remember, because Finn, my old Shepherd Lab mix, had just knocked over his water bowl for the third time that week, and I was drying the floor when my phone pinged. Kaylin Family Celebration. A tribute to 10 years of togetherness. That was the subject line. No. Hi Sydney. No dear family member. Nothing personal, just a blocky email signature at the bottom from Vera and Henry. It read like a mass mailer, the kind you'd get from a real estate office trying to host a barbecue and sell you a listing. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I did what I hadn't done in months. I called my sister. She picked up on the second ring, her voice chirpy like she was mid-laugh. "Sid, how are you? I was just thinking about you." "Hey," I said slow. "I got your invitation. It didn't have my name on it. Was that just—" "Oh," she cut me off like I was making a fuss over nothing. "Totally, a printing thing. You know how those Evites can be glitchy? Don't overthink it." "Okay." She steamrolled past my silence. "It's just going to be a casual backyard thing. Some food, a few speeches, you know, family love and all that." "Family love, right?" I didn't say much more. Hung up after a few pleasantries. I could have said no. I should have, but something in me, something that still wanted to believe things could be different, made me say yes. That Saturday, I loaded up the car and left Asheville before noon. In the back seat was a wrapped box with a photo collage I'd spent 2 nights making. It featured pictures from years ago, Vera's kids as toddlers, our parents when they still looked strong, even one of me and Vera from high school, smiling like we hadn't yet learned how to hate each other. Alongside it was a hand-sewn pillow. My mother once made it when her hands still worked the needle with precision. It had been sitting in my guest room for years, waiting for someone to care. Finn jumped into the passenger seat like he always did, head out the window halfway through the drive. It helped me breathe having him there, like someone still remembered I existed. The party was held at Vera's house in a Charlotte suburb, where everything looked like it had been chosen from the same catalog. Manicured lawns, houses painted in variations of beige, the kind of neighborhood where people posted HOA rules like gospel. There were about 30 cars lined up outside by the time I arrived. I parked down the street and walked up the sidewalk with the box in my arms, nodding at a couple of neighbors I didn't recognize. They didn't nod back. The backyard had been dressed up with white tents and string lights, tables covered in mason jar centerpieces and printed napkins. A sign hung above the grill celebrating the Kaylin legacy, 10 years of growth. I wasn't sure what exactly had grown, but clearly it didn't include me. A young woman at the welcome table, someone I didn't know, handed me a badge. "Hi, guest number 18. Here you go." I blinked. "I'm Sydney, Vera's sister." "Oh," she said, faltering. "Sorry, we just went by the list she gave us." Of course they did. I slipped the badge into my purse and walked in. Conversations swirled around me. Familiar voices, catching up on soccer leagues, school awards, and new kitchen renovations. Nobody looked up. Nobody called my name. The photo wall was impossible to miss. 10 feet wide, framed by fairy lights, Kaylin family memories. It said there were dozens of pictures. Vera's wedding, her kids' birthdays, Dad fishing with Henry, Mom at Thanksgiving with a pie I baked. Except I wasn't in any of them. Not one. I stood there longer than I should have, letting my eyes search for even a corner of my own existence. It wasn't there. I might as well have never been born. Someone behind me whispered, "Is she Vera's cousin?" I turned and smiled. "No, just her sister." "You must be." They laughed awkwardly and turned away. I moved to the gift table and gently sat down my box. A teenage boy, maybe a neighbor's kid, swept by and slid it under the table, out of sight. Just like that, I spotted my mother near the drink and walked over. "Hi, Mom." She looked me up and down. "You made it," she said, voice clipped. Her eyes scanned the room almost immediately, like she needed to return her attention to someone more important. Dad joined her, nodded at me. No hug, no warmth. Nice to see you both, I said. Dad nodded again, reached for a soda. By the time dinner was served, I was seated at a folding table behind the speaker stand next to the portable toilet. No one called my name in the speeches. No one unwrapped the gift. No one asked how I'd been, what I was doing, if I was okay. I smiled through every course, every toast, every fake laugh. But something inside me, it started to twist. The sun had dipped lower by the time Vera tapped her wineglass, the soft chimes slicing through the hum of conversation like a blade. I was seated at a folding table, pushed awkwardly against the far side of the tent, practically in the shadows. Not that anyone seemed to notice. A portable restroom was stationed just feet from my chair. The irony didn't escape me. As I shifted in my seat, a young woman, in a lilac dress, someone Vera had probably hired for the event, approached with a plastic badge. "Here you go," she said, handing it to me with a bright, empty smile. I looked down. The badge read 37. I turned it over once, twice, wondering if it was a mistake. Around me, others had badges labeled with their roles. Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, the Kalin matriarch, labels that meant something. Identities. Mine felt like a placeholder, a number, a suggestion that I didn't belong. I slid the badge into my purse without comment. No point in making a scene about something so small when the message was already loud and clear. Across the yard, I spotted Noah Lee. We hadn't seen each other in years, not since high school graduation when she'd taken off to California, and I'd stayed behind to keep our family glued together. She caught my eye, tilted her head as if to say, "You good?" I offered her a small nod, non-committal, but grateful. Then Vera stood. She looked radiant. I'll admit, she always did in crowds. Her voice carried effortlessly, polished from years of socializing and performing. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the Kalin family legacy," she began, grinning as if she were hosting a charity gala, not a backyard dinner. She launched into a well-rehearsed tribute to our parents, to her husband Henry, to their kids. She spoke about tradition, sacrifice, building for the future. I already knew she'd use phrases like carrying the torch or making our ancestors proud. It was her favorite kind of language. Lofty, empty, calculated. Then she glanced in my direction. "There's one more thing we've been meaning to ask. Sydney, could you stand with us for a moment?" I froze for a second, my hand tightening around the stem of my water glass. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. The clinking of silverware paused. Even the kids stopped fidgeting. I rose slowly, legs heavier than they should have been, and walked toward the center. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Vera smiled. That too sweet grin that always meant something was coming. "As you all know, Henry and I are doing everything we can to create lasting memories for our children. We've been saving, dreaming, trying to give them the best childhood possible. And well, Sydney has a beautiful cabin up in the mountains." She turned to face the crowd, tone shifting to syrupy sincerity, one she barely uses. I opened my mouth, unsure what I was about to say, but Vera cut in quickly. "We think it would be such a wonderful gesture, such a family-first thing, if she let us use the cabin, you know, made it part of the Kalin legacy." There it was. The murmur began instantly. Gasps. A few supportive claps. Someone muttered, "That's generous," as if I'd already agreed. I glanced toward my parents. My mother wore the same frozen smile she always reserved for social settings. My father gave a slight nod of approval. They weren't surprised. They were complicit. Then my mother added loud enough for all to hear, "It's not like you need it. You don't have a family." It didn't come with malice. That was the worst part. It was said as fact. Something inside me split. "No," I said, clear and unwavering. Silence swept the backyard. Every eye landed on me again, this time with a mixture of confusion and discomfort. Vera blinked. My father frowned. My mother's smile twitched. "It's not yours," I said, looking directly at Vera. "And it never will be." The hush was palpable. For a second, even the birds stopped chirping. Then Vera turned her back to me, gestured to the crowd like nothing had happened. Applause broke out again. But it wasn't for me. It was for her. For the idea of family unity. For the woman who had just tried to publicly strip me of my dignity and my property. I didn't say another word. I didn't cry. I turned and walked back to my table. My purse still holding the nameless badge. My gift still untouched beneath the drink station. I didn't touch my plate again. I waited until dessert was served, then excused myself without fanfare. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. Not from sadness, not even from rage, but from clarity. Something had snapped inside me, and not in the way they feared. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a decision. Vera didn't flinch when I said no. She just tilted her chin, narrowed her eyes like she was trying to understand why I'd dare step out of place. The smile she'd worn moments earlier evaporated, replaced by a hard line that matched the tension building around the tent. The air got dense. Conversations fizzled into silence. People clutched their wine glasses. Some glanced at one another, unsure what they were supposed to do now that someone had broken the script. I stood there back straight, not daring to retreat, but not planning to indulge them either. Then I heard the sound of Dad's boots crossing the wooden deck behind me. Steady, heavy, each step a beat of warning. "You've always been ungrateful," he muttered under his breath. Before I could process the words, before I could even brace for impact, his hand came across my face with a crack that split the moment in half. I staggered a step to the side, but didn't fall. I blinked hard. My cheek stung, skin hot with the burn of his palm. My ear rang, but it wasn't the pain that caught me off guard. It was the sound that followed. Applause it started, with Vera. One slow clap, deliberate, like she was cueing the crowd. Then another person joined, and another, and within seconds, the backyard was filled with polite, restrained clapping, not the kind you hear at a concert, the kind you hear at a PTA meeting when someone announces a policy that only benefits a few. Cautious, social, complicit. I looked out across the sea of familiar faces, cousins, neighbors, family, friends. Not one of them moved to help. No one gasped in horror, no one walked toward me. I pressed my palm to my cheek, not to comfort myself, but to anchor the moment. Off to the side, I saw Lucian lift his phone and start recording Vera, who beamed with satisfaction. Her arms crossed gently, like she'd just watched a particularly well-executed speech. She had it coming, I heard someone say near the dessert table. Then Mom stepped forward. Claudette, with her freshly curled hair and her floral dress that looked like it belonged on the cover of a church bulletin. Her voice was louder than I expected. "That's why you'll die alone," she said. "You're just a barren waste." I stared at her, not because I didn't believe she said it, but because she didn't blink when she did. It was cold, not theatrical, not even angry, just true in her mind. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just looked at her and let that sentence hang in the air like smoke from a house here. There was nothing left to say to them, nothing that would be heard, nothing they'd be willing to admit, even if I spelled it out letter by letter. I turned and walked away. No one followed. Noah Lee looked like she wanted to. She took a step in my direction, but then Vera shot her a glance, a silent reminder that her place was on the side of the clapping. I kept walking past the tables, past the tent poles, past the woman at the badge table who avoided my eyes. By the time I reached the gravel path leading to my car, my face was still burning, but it wasn't from the slap anymore. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there with both hands gripping the steering wheel. My chest was tight, not with panic, not even with rage, with something colder, sharper. I whispered to myself, "Burn this in your memory." I glanced once in the rear view mirror. My reflection looked not shocked, not devastated, just done. Finn was in the back seat, already curled up, sensing my shift in energy. I reached for my phone, the contact list popping up with muscle memory. My thumb hovered for a moment, then I tapped Ariadne Wolf. She picked up after 2 rings. "Sydney, are you okay?" "I need to talk," I said, my voice flat but firm about what legal options I have for protecting my property and myself. She didn't hesitate. "I'm here. Whatever you need." I ended the call a few minutes later with a list of action steps and a plan forming in my head like bricks clicking into place. No screaming, no storming back into the party, no pleas for understanding. They had written their own story tonight. My job now was to change the ending. The miles between Charlotte and Asheville rolled by in a blur. I didn't play music, didn't crack a window, just drove, hands steady, eyes fixed. The trees lining the interstate blurred into a muted green wall. The late evening sun, casting long shadows across the road like reminders of what I was leaving behind. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the cabin lights were dim, soft, familiar. Finn stirred in the back seat, but didn't bark. He knew this energy, knew when my silence meant I needed space, not sympathy. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The mountain air was cooler here. Cleaner. I breathed in deeply, though it did nothing to soften the edge that had sharpened inside me. When I opened the back door to grab the gift I'd taken to the party, the handmade photo collage, and the pillow my mother once claimed to love, I hesitated. It was still neatly wrapped, untouched. I left it in the car. Inside, I dropped my purse on the bench by the door and walked straight to the sink. I removed my earrings one by one, placed them in the small dish I always kept to the left of the faucet. The mirror above the sink reflected my face, but I didn't look up. I didn't want to see the mark, or worse, the calm. Instead, I turned on the water, rinsed my face, and let the cold soothe the swelling. My cheek throbbed with a dull ache, but the real wound wasn't physical. It was how easily it had happened, how natural it seemed to everyone else. I dried my face with a towel, then stood still in the quiet of my kitchen. No ticking clocks, no distant voices, just the hum of the refrigerator and the low rustle of Finn settling onto his blanket in the living room. Then my phone buzzed. I picked it up from the counter, expecting another automated alert or maybe a spam message, but it was from Noah Lee. I should have said something. I'm sorry. What they did was wrong. I stared at the screen. The message wasn't long. No dramatic apology, just honesty. Finally, from someone. I didn't write back, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because it would have cracked something inside me that I needed to keep sealed. At least for now. For the first time since the slap, my hands weren't shaking. I sat down at the edge of the couch, Finn lifting his head slightly before resting it back on his paws. My gaze drifted toward the window out into the woods behind the cabin. I remembered building this place. Every decision from the layout to the fixtures was mine. No one helped. No one asked to. It was my escape when being their daughter became too heavy to carry. They never asked how I managed to buy it, never thanked me for the checks I mailed during the pandemic when Mom's prescriptions were delayed, never acknowledged the car Vera drove was co-signed by me. That's the thing about people like them. They never forget what they've done for you, but they conveniently erase anything you do for them. I thought about childhood, about that time when Vera broke her wrist falling from the swing, and I sat with her at the hospital all night, even though Mom barely glanced at me once. I remembered the birthdays I spent alone while she was away at cheerleading camps, and the years I stayed to help Dad at the store when Vera flew off to her next adventure. All of that felt distant now, less painful, more instructive. I whispered out loud just to the air. They've never seen me angry. That's their mistake. With that, I stood up and walked over to my desk. The laptop blinked to life. I entered my password, opened my files, and clicked on a folder I hadn't looked at in over a year. Family finance, personal records. There were dozens of PDFs, bank statements, scanned receipts, Venmo screenshots. Every loan, every just this once favor Vera asked me for, was right there, neatly filed, dated, documented. I clicked open one labeled Cabin Transfer Agreement Draft. A draft Vera had asked me to review 2 years ago, proposing I gift the cabin in writing for tax efficiency. I never signed it, but she had her name typed in bold in the recipient line. That alone made my stomach twist. Another file, Claudette Medical Fund, 2020. It listed a transfer from my account for over $6,000 when insurance had lapsed. Dad said he'd reimburse me. He never did. And he never mentioned that he'd later opened another account in Mom's name, which now, with her memory fading, looked a whole lot more suspicious than helpful. I sat back, stared at the screen, then reached for my phone again. Ariadne picked up quickly. Hey, how are you holding up? I think my mother's name is being used on accounts she doesn't understand. I want to find out how deep it goes. There was a pause. Then she asked, do you have proof? I have more than that, I said. I have patterns. She exhaled slowly. Okay, then it's time we start a trail. I'll walk you through how to document this for legal review. As we spoke, I took notes, flagged files, and created a master document. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about defending the truth against a lifetime of well-practiced lies. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to throw anything or post some performative monologue online. I just needed proof. And I had more of it than they could ever imagine. By the next morning, the sting in my cheek had faded, but the clarity remained razor sharp. The fog that usually clouded my instincts after family events, second-guessing, guilt, shame, was gone. All that was left was stillness and a steady sense of purpose. After my first cup of coffee and feeding Finn, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop again. My plan wasn't to attack, it was to uncover and then protect. I rewatched the video clips from the party, the ones that had been recorded quietly by guests and sent to me later. One caught my attention more than the others. Vera giving a casual tour of the backyard's Kaylin legacy table. There it was. My mother's old embroidered table runner. I hadn't seen it in years. It was unmistakable. Cream, linen, delicate vine stitching in the corners, and on one end, stitched in green thread, were my initials. Small, discreet, Hansun by Mom when I was 17. Vera beamed at the camera. This is one of Mom's gifts to us. She wanted the kids to have something of hers to pass down. I paused the video. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from a sense of theft I hadn't expected. That runner was mine. Mom had made it for me. I remember the afternoon she handed it to me, saying, "You'll have your own place one day, and you'll want something familiar." She had meant it, or maybe she'd just forgotten. I took a screenshot of Vera holding the cloth, labeled the file's symbolic theft, and filed it alongside the others in a new folder. Kaylin active evidence. Later that morning, Ariadne called with updates. "You were right," she said. "There's a credit line opened in your mother's name. $15,000 opened last year, co-signed electronically." My stomach dropped. She wouldn't even know how to open her email anymore. That's what makes it problematic. If she doesn't have the cognitive capacity and someone's using her identity, we're looking at potential elder financial abuse. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. And it was Vera, and my father. The co-signing IP address traces back to Wendell's home Wi-Fi. We're still confirming more details. Document everything, I told her, already opening a spreadsheet to log the details. I want every transaction connected to that account. Every name, every dollar. I'll have our forensic CPA looped in by end of day, she said. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring out the window, Finn's tail thumping lightly as he rested nearby. I wasn't angry in the way I thought I'd be. Not shouting, not broken. I felt surgical, cold, but precise, focused. By mid-afternoon, I had written and rewritten the same email 3 times. Eventually, I settled for simplicity. I sent it to both Vera and Wendell. Subject line: "Enough. You used her name. You repurposed her memory. You humiliated me in front of people I once considered family. If you continue, I will act with everything I have and everything I know. This is your last warning." No reply, no call, not even a vague apology. But a few hours later, Vera posted on Instagram a picture of her and Henry on a porch swing, laughing. The caption read, "Some people think family owes them something. They don't." I stared at the screen. She wasn't even being subtle. They never were. I didn't respond. Instead, I printed every file I had, the bank statements, the digital receipts, the video screenshots. I filed them in a hard copy binder and stored it in a locked drawer. I also saved everything to an encrypted cloud drive. Ariadne had warned me, never let a single copy be the only copy. That evening, just before dusk, I took Finn out for a walk around the edge of the property. The air was crisp, the mountain quiet, only broken by the rustle of small animals and the creaking of old trees in the wind. I stopped at the edge of the trail that led to the cabin's back clearing, looked out at the horizon, and whispered something I hadn't said out loud in years. If they crossed this line, I won't hold back anymore. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. It happened before I'd even poured my second cup of coffee. I was still in my robe, Finn nosing around the kitchen when the voicemail icon blinked on my phone. I tapped play with a strange sense of calm, almost like I already knew. "Hi, this is Michelle from Carolina First Bank. We received a property transfer form regarding the cabin at Blue Laurel Ridge submitted on your behalf yesterday. We just need your verbal confirmation before we finalize the ownership change to Vera Kaylin." My thumb hovered over the delete button. Instead, I hit save. Within the hour, I was dressed, papers in hand, and heading into town. Finn rode with me. He always did on days I needed steel in my spine. I walked into the bank, cool mountain air clinging to me, leash in one hand, a manila folder in the other. I didn't ask to speak to Michelle. I asked for the branch manager. The lobby smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner and institutional coffee. A receptionist greeted me with that trained, professional smile. 5 minutes later, I was seated across from a middle-aged man in a navy tie, who looked like he was unready for the kind of conversation I was about to bring. "There's been an attempt to change ownership of my property," I said, unfolding the paperwork. "It wasn't authorized. Here's the original deed. My name, my signature, alone." He cleared his throat. "It says here, the request came with an attached letter of family agreement forged." I said, sliding over a copy of my signature, compared to the one on the submitted form. I'll compare them, he did. His expression didn't change, but his fingers twitched. We freeze this request immediately, he said, and flag the account for any future alterations. Thank you, I replied, standing. And please log this internally. This won't be the last time her name comes across your desk. By early afternoon, I was back home, sitting in front of my laptop. The folder I once buried under layers of digital clutter, family debt, do not touch, was now front and center. I opened it like I was opening a vault. The files stretched back a decade. Every time Vera borrowed money, every emergency bill I covered, every favor I never asked to be repaid, but also never forgot. It was all there, itemized with screenshots, bank transfers, text confirmations, receipts for co-signed loans, notes from when I paid off Mom's hospital bills in 2020. Quietly, because it wasn't the right time to talk about money, I created a new Excel file, called it Kaylin Family Facts. 1 column date, next amount, then recipient, then description, then notes. Emotionally restrained but honest. $12,000 marked private down payment support. Confidential. I remembered that one clearly. Vera had begged me not to tell Henry she couldn't afford their new home's closing costs. I spent the next hour pulling in documents from emails, online banking, even old voicemail files. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the pattern, the behavior, the entitlement that had metastasized inside my family like rot beneath polished wood. When the spreadsheet was complete, I saved it 3 times on a local hard drive, an encrypted cloud, and a flash drive I kept in a fireproof box. Then I started making calls. The IRS agent on the phone was polite, attentive. I didn't exaggerate. I just told them what I'd found. Suspicious income transfers, lack of repayment, informal family loans that had never been declared as gifts. Next was Adult Protective Services. I explained Mom's cognitive decline. The account opened in her name. The financial activity that began around the same time, her memory slipped. Then I called the credit bureau and flagged both my account and Mom's for identity monitoring. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. I was efficient, precise. By the time the sun began to dip behind the ridge, I had documented everything. My hands were tired, my eyes dry, but my mind was more alert than it had been in years. That evening, I received a text from Vera. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I stared at it for a few seconds, then responded with a single image, a side-by-side of the forged property transfer and my real signature. No words, just truth. Then Wendell called. His voice had that same sharp edge I remembered from childhood, the one he used when I dared speak back. "You're destroying this family, Sydney." I took a deep breath, then answered flatly, "You did that when you hit me in front of 60 people and applauded the lie." There was silence on the line, then the sound of him hanging up. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel guilt either. I felt certainty. They had drawn the line. And now I was the one holding the pen. The next morning began with sunlight creeping through the trees and landing directly across my kitchen table where last night's coffee mug still sat beside my open laptop, fins stretched near my feet, ears twitching from a bird's chatter outside. But I stayed frozen in the chair, rereading the email Ariadne sent just after midnight, filed cease and desist, rebuttal submitted. I also forwarded the deed history and tax records to their legal rep for clarity. The silence in my home contrasted starkly with what was happening outside it. Vera had posted again, this time a polished photo of her and Henry standing in front of a faux fireplace set, arms around their kids. The caption read, "Family money should be for those who build legacies, not for those who disappear into the woods with dogs." I stared at the screen, expressionless. If they wanted to play with fire, I had enough dry brush to fuel a forest blaze. I didn't post anything in return. No cryptic, no vague moral jab. Instead, I opened my email and wrote to Ariadne, "Let them keep talking. We have the truth and the law." An hour later, I received a packet in the mail. No signature, no return address, just a white envelope containing a printed letter from Vera and Wendell's attorney. They were accusing me of holding the cabin in trust for the family, that it had always been understood as a shared asset, not a personal one, that I had only managed it temporarily until the family needed it for legacy purposes, and now they were demanding I transfer it to Vera formally. It took everything in me not to laugh. Instead, I scanned the document and sent it to Ariadne. She replied almost instantly, We suggest your client review actual property deeds before making baseless claims. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. These weren't emotional outbursts anymore. These were tactics measured, rehearsed. They were playing a public relations game while trying to strong-arm a legal one. That evening, after dinner and a long walk with Finn, I reviewed the cabin's exterior cameras. I'd installed them myself after a break-in scare during the winter. Nothing elaborate, just enough coverage to see the drive and the porch. The video history loaded smoothly, and I scanned the timestamps from 2 days earlier. There they were, Vera and Lucian, unannounced, uninvited, pulling up in his black SUV. Lucian carried a briefcase. Vera wore that dress she saved for Sunday brunches she never paid for. They walked around the porch, looked through the windows, and my breath caught. They let themselves in using a key. I paused the feed, leaned forward, and scrubbed through the footage. There in the kitchen, they stood beside a man in a gray blazer with a small suitcase. He opened it. Notary stamp. I zoomed in. Lucian placed documents on the counter. Ver pointed. The man stamped one of the pages. Vera signed. Lucian signed. Then they left. No call? No heads up? No legal right? I downloaded the footage, backed it up, and sent it to Ariadne, along with a note. They've officially trespassed and forged legal signatures with a notary present. Time to make this public. She didn't need to be told twice. Within the hour, the video was forwarded to the State Bar Association, the Secretary of State's office, and a trusted reporter. She knew at a local affiliate. The next morning, it started to unravel. My inbox was flooded with messages, some hateful, some apologetic, a few anonymous. One said, "You should be ashamed. You're ruining your parents' lives." I read that one 3 times. Then, for the first time, I posted publicly. Abuse doesn't stop being abuse just because it's happening behind smiles and casseroles. Silence isn't love, it's complicity. The post caught fire. People began to comment. Strangers, friends, even former classmates. Others shared their own stories of inheritance, manipulation, forced family property transfers, gaslighting, masked as tradition. The hashtag started trending. #Kaylin Cabin Conspiracy. Within 24 hours, Vera's influencer partnerships began quietly vanishing. One brand posted an announcement. "We have paused our relationship with Mrs. Kaylin pending clarification of legal concerns." That night, I took another walk with Finn. The sky was deep indigo, and the wind whispered through the trees, like it knew everything. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like a wound had been cut open, and finally allowed to bleed out. They tried to take my home. I took back the truth. Now it was time for the consequences. By the time the video reached Carmen Ro's inbox, I was outside, clipping dead branches off the blueberry bushes near the shed. My phone buzzed against the porch rail every few minutes, but I ignored it. I'd done what I came to do, expose the truth, and now I was letting gravity do the rest. Carmen had messaged me once before, quietly after the party. I didn't clap, she had written. I just froze. I'm sorry I hadn't responded then. I didn't need apologies. I needed action. Apparently, she understood that, too. The clip she posted to Reddit was 27 seconds long, just enough to show the sound of the slap, the shocked expression on my face, Ver's hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause, and then the crowd, some laughing, some nodding, no one intervening. Her caption was direct. This was a family reunion. This is how they treated their youngest daughter. It didn't take long. By evening, the video had over 300,000 views. By midnight, it had crossed 1 million. Blonde waist started trending across platforms. Part ridicule, part outrage. People reposted it with reactions ranging from disgust to disbelief. Talk shows started calling. Commentators dissected every frame. What kind of family thinks this is normal? I didn't speak to the press. I didn't give interviews. I didn't even tweet. I let the story live on its own, without embellishment. That was the part they never understood. Truth doesn't need spin. It just needs oxygen.